Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked, the series where I talk about every single book on my shelves, because we need to solve this calendrical heresy together. Today we are going to be talking about Yoon Lee's Machinery of Empire series. Machineries of Empire. Machineries of Empire. I know what I'm doing. Some quick disclaimers before I start talking about these in a bit more detail. This first one was gifted to me. I cannot remember by whom, but it was a gift. And then I listened to the other books in the series on audiobook via Scribd. Scribd are not paying me for this. Nobody else is paying me to talk about books, and all opinions are my own. I also think there are some content warnings that apply for this series as a whole, particularly to do with consent and the lack thereof. So if you are sensitive to those things, I urge you to look them up. I will link the story graph for the books below. Lastly, I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible, though if you do want to go into the series knowing absolutely nothing, obviously click away now. Nine Fox Gambit, the first book in this series, came out in 2016 in the UK. It is published by Solaris, which again is probably another disclaimer. My wife works for Rebellion, the company that owns them. It's not relevant to this, they're not affecting my opinion of books whatsoever. Right, I did make a list of all the awards that it received. So it received the 2017 Locus Award for Best First Novel and was nominated for the 2016 Nebula and 2017 Hugo Awards for Best Novel and the 2017 Clarke Award. Raven Stratagem, the second book, was nominated for the 2018 Hugo Award for Best Novel, and Revenant Gun was nominated for the 2019 Hugo Award for Best Novel. By the way, I'm sorry if you can hear scraping outside, somebody's doing something in their garden. I can't control my neighbours. Yoon Lee is a Korean-American author who has also written, it's behind me somewhere, Phoenix Extravagant, which I do have a fairly old at this point, but it is still relevant review up on this channel somewhere. I will link that if I remember. Under plot summary, Past Me has written, you can try. So I'm going to try. In a world with incredibly complicated world building, largely based on the calendar, our main character of book one, Kel Cheris, gets mind melded with a old general who is fairly infamous. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. And it is space, warfare, weird world building, double crossing, espionage almost, sort of, interesting stuff. This book is really hard to pin down. I know for a fact Angela has done a really wonderful video on this series that I will link if you want to get more into the world building. Angela is much better at explaining things than I am, so I will link that. Do I kind of feel like maybe you should just go watch that video and I'm gonna try and spout some nonsense? Probably. It's fine. I will do my best to summarise my thoughts on the world building, even though I cannot summarise the world building for you. I found this really difficult the first time I read it. The first time I read Nine Fox Gambit, I read it physically, and I didn't really understand much. I left with a vague idea of what had happened, but I wasn't totally certain, and I felt a bit awash in it all. And I think that's because the world building is quite difficult to get through and to see what's important, particularly in a first read. I think this is a series that will improve with rereading. Certainly I found that with the first book. I think that if you are a person who really likes digging into that complicated world building, that won't be a problem for you. If you're like me and you prefer to really get into the story and let the world building happen around you, it might not be so good. I'm sorry, I'm really sneezy today. So it's a pro and a con. I found that by the end of the short stories, Hexarchate stories, I was feeling pretty solid on the world building, but it did take me 3 books and a whole load of short stories to really understand it. So know that going in, and I think you'll have a better time. I've also found that this series has really given me a lot to think about, which is something that I really like, and something that I found in Yoon Lee's other writing as well. I think it has a lot of themes that don't leap out at you at first, but maybe you can have a chat about them and ponder it out and so such. I actually found talking to my wife who's read these and wasn't such a huge fan of them really helpful for discerning what I did like about them and where I'd landed on some of the ideas that she really didn't enjoy. I found that very helpful. So I'd potentially say read this with someone else who you can kind of bounce ideas off of. In some ways though, I think that I'm overcomplicating this series for you because on one level, especially having read the short stories, I feel like this is meant to be more fun than it feels. And that might be a con, that might be a negative, but I think that if you let yourself lean into this, like, we're just going to do space battles. I don't need to understand how it works, I just need to enjoy this space battle, or I don't need to know really who is doing what and why, I'm just going to enjoy this happening in front of me. And I think that listening to them via audiobook really helped me with that, because I wasn't getting too focused on trying to like read through pages and get through things. I was just letting it all happen through my ears while I was walking the dog. It was a nice experience. So I think that there are a lot of really fun elements to this. There just also are some darker themes running through, so you can't completely say like, oh, this is just some fun, wacky sci-fi. It's not that. So yeah, I did find it confusing. And I can't deny that. And I think that what I did for a lot of the time was do what I do when I'm reading books about economics, is just to go, I'm going to substitute the word stuff for a lot of these very technical terms, and I'll hopefully take away from that what I need to know. And that did work for me. Do I think that that's a sign of really great world building? Not necessarily. I think you should be able to understand a book, and it would be like my biggest negative towards this series is I think it can be a little bit difficult to engage with. By the end, I was having a good time. I think for that reason, if someone asked me for sci-fi recommendations and they weren't a big sci-fi reader, if they were similar to me, where they'd read some, but a lot of it was very kind of fantasy sci-fi-esque, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this first. I think I'd need a very specific, oh, this person wants Machineries of Empire kind of cue for a recommendation. That's where I would sit anyway. What would be my first sci-fi recommendation to somebody like me? It would be Becky Chambers, wouldn't it? Yeah. I don't know why I'm debating that. It would be Becky Chambers. But if you did like these, if you did want something that felt very similar, if you wanted a fantasy book that I think feels very similar or gave me similar difficulties in some ways, but similar positives as well. And Baru Cormorant, the Masquerade series by Seth Dickinson, is an incomplete series, but I think it has a lot of that really complicated, you can dig into it, thoughts and feelings in the science of it all as well, but primarily to do with economics. I found that really enjoyable as a sort of a challenge, I guess, if you want something a bit meatier. I've also put the Locked Tomb series on this list, so Gideon the Ninth, Harry the Ninth, and I think that's partly just because of my feelings about books that feel too complicated, but I don't think the two are particularly similar in tone, just in how much they explain themselves to you. That style of world building, I guess. Oh, I had something else. I had another thing I was going to bring up. Ancillary Justice by Ann Leckie is another one that I've read fairly recently that had similar ideas of we're trying to explore people within a very complicated society, and also to do with like sci-fi war, which is a whole other thing on itself. I enjoyed this fairly well. I think this, similar to this, is going to be one that I'll want to reread and have a better time with it via audio. So my recommendation, normally at the end of these videos, I'm kind of like a yes or no person. For this, I think I'm very much a maybe. If you're wanting this particular vibe of a thing, I think you will enjoy this. If you're someone like me where actually I need my sci-fi to be a little bit more spoon-fed to me, at the moment, I'm building on my sci-fi ability. However, having said that, I feel such a sense of accomplishment having finished this series, because I really thought I was never going to, and having finished it, understood it, and really felt like I absorbed the content and absorbed the story, I just found super rewarding, which is great, and it's always nice to feel rewarded for your efforts. I would say my recommendation is to do the audiobooks. I think the narrator's really good. I think that it just gives you the time to take in some more information that you don't necessarily pick up on the page, but that's going to depend on your reading style, obviously. For me personally, that worked really well. And I would also say, if you have read the first three and you're still a little bit confused, picking up the short stories, Hexarchate stories, is well worth doing. It cleared some things up for me that I hadn't fully comprehended, that now I feel pretty solid on, and I could have a conversation about these books and not feel totally stupid. I will also continue to be looking for Yoon Lee's work. I think the books are just fantastic, and I think that they're an author that's just going to grow in their ability, because this is a start, right? I'm excited to see what the future holds. Are there any sci-fi books that you would recommend? I know I've asked this fairly frequently recently. I've just been talking about a lot of sci-fi, it would seem. And also, do you find that with particular genres or particular subgenres, audiobook works best for you? I really find with sci-fi, I need it by audiobook, or I'm not gonna comprehend it as much. I'm interested to know what goes on in your little brain, because my little brain is very tired. And also, have you read these? What are your thoughts and opinions? While you're down there commenting all of those things, you can subscribe if you haven't already. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also follow me on social media, come hang out on Discord, where we have a wonderful time talking about books. Nothing makes me feel more loved and appreciated than my patrons over on Patreon. Very excited to be hanging out with you guys. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you'd like to join their number, that's all below as well. On to the bloopers. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. Certainly I found that with, but that's gonna depend on your writing style, reading style.